Greetings! My name is Neosekken, and welcome to a brand new Let's Play of Crimson Gray, Dusk and Dawn. Now, this is a direct sequel to the events of the first Crimson Gray game, and it takes place during the college years of our two main characters, John and Lizzie, pictured here in this lovely, perfectly intact photo frame that you see here. For some reason, I thought this game was a retelling of the first game from Lizzie's perspective, but I think I ended up getting that confused, and I was only half right. This game does take place from Lizzie's perspective, but it's not a retelling of the first game's events. Because again, this takes place during a few years after the first game, during their college years. So, yeah, don't ask me how I got the idea that this was a retelling of the first game's events here, because, well, I can't really say for sure how I got that idea. Now, two things before we get this new game started and we continue the story of this interesting couple. Number one, since this is a direct sequel to the first Crimson Gray, I am expecting that it's going to reference events from the first game, so spoiler alert for that. So yeah, if you don't want to get any spoilers for the first game's events, then you should probably watch a Let's Play of that first, play it yourself, whatever, before checking this series out. Well, this Let's Play series, I mean. And number two, I noticed when I was going through the options menu, there is a toggle for adult content. And the reason I'm going to keep this off is because, well, YouTube and BitChute don't exactly allow for straight pornographic content, according to what I read in both their terms of service. Well, I've known about that with YouTube for a while, but I've only recently confirmed that BitChute doesn't allow straight pornographic content either. Although I think my understanding of it is a bit vague. I think they would allow some instances of like nudity and stuff like that, depending on the context, but since I'm pretty sure that adult content in this instance would refer to two characters or more essentially doing the horizontal hokey pokey with each other on screen for us all to see, I don't think BitChute would really necessarily allow for this kind of content either, let alone YouTube. So I'm going to just save myself the trouble and just keep the adult content off throughout this Let's Play. Because believe me, in an ideal world, if it were up to me, I would have it on just so nothing gets censored. And I mean, it's sex. I mean, I'm 26 freaking years old here. I mean, sex is sex to me. It's nothing particularly special. It's nothing scandalous here. I mean, a lot of people fucking do it. It's how we reproduce. Sex in of itself doesn't really bother me. But apparently it bothers the platforms that I'm putting these videos on, so I'm not going to push my luck. So I'm deeply sorry if any of you guys were hoping to see any of these adult scenes, but I gotta play it safe. I don't want to go out of my way to piss off the platforms I'm on, you know? So, yeah, that's pretty much why I'm going to keep the adult content off. So, now that I got all that out of the way, let's just go ahead and get this game started. Author's note, this game is a direct sequel to the original Crimson Gray and will make less sense if you didn't play the first one. I kind of figured as much. Review the story so far. I'll go play the first one then, and I played the first one. Well, I played the first one. Achievement unlocked. College days. Okay, uses the same exact save system. I just hope that finding all the endings for this game isn't going to be quite as strict as was the first game. Otherwise, I might be here a little while. Well, with the series, I mean. We'll see, I guess. The melancholy melody echoed within her, and Lizzie clung to it. There was a time when the melody hadn't been within her, though she preferred not to think about that time. That was before she met him, capital H. The melody was sad, but it was his, and so she loved it. and it was certainly better than emptiness. I also like how fully colored everything is. Definitely a step up from the first game. Lizzie had expected that meeting her special person would change everything, and it had. But to her surprise, it hadn't happened all at once. Instead, they both grew and changed, their life together becoming ever more wonderful, and her mind growing to encompass it. Yet she had a difficult time pinpointing exactly when she had first heard the melody. It would have been romantic if it had appeared at some monumentous occasion, such as when she met him, or when they first made love, or on some future day when they were finally married. But instead it had slowly emerged, whispering at the edges of her mind. Smiling to herself, Lizzie began to contemplate the beginnings of the melody more thoroughly. But at that moment, her world was disrupted by two people approaching her. Who the hell are you two? Are you basically this college's equivalent of John and Lizzie, respectively, and you're the depressed one that tolerates the yandere's craziness, right? Or maybe you two are just perfectly normal. But somehow I doubt it. Her eyes flickered over their substanceless bodies, analyzing everything about them. She distantly knew the girl's name, had only seen the boy on several occasions, both sophomores like John and her. No physical threat. Lizzie had seen the two of them holding hands on the campus green, and from pupil dilation, judged them to be a couple, so unlikely to be a threat to her relationship. But now they were approaching her, she put on her usual smile and considered them more carefully. The boy was normal enough, but the girl, she was rather pretty and dressed fairly well. It would take so little for her to try to show off what she had. Kind of like that. Was that a teasing glint in her eye? Lizzie's smile widened just a bit, and she reclassified the girl as a minor threat. Hey, sorry to interrupt. It's Lizzie, right? That's right. Nice to meet you. If you know what's good for you, you'll stay within stay outside of a 5-mile radius of Lizzie. Just saying. She responded politely as they introduced themselves, only tracking the information for future reference. Once, putting on a friendly mask had been difficult for her, an imitation of something she'd only observed. Now she could fake it more easily, mirroring real emotions she had when she was with him. It irritated her to waste her smiles on random people who didn't matter, though. So as soon as possible, Lizzie encouraged them to get to the point. We're trying to start a social thing for other couples on campus. They may be about the same age, but hanging out with single college kids just isn't the same, you know? We don't have many people yet, so if you have any ideas, we're open to them. Either of you. Your husband's name is John, right? Why did she know his name? Now, Lizzie, she probably just heard it in passing, or she looked up a student roster or something, okay? Don't get homicidal just yet, or better yet, don't ever get homicidal. That would be better for everybody. Lizzie's smile became brittle as she stared over the girl again, searching for the slightest tick that might give her away. She had played it off like she wasn't sure about his name, but she knew. Lizzie was sure of it. Perhaps her analysis of their threat was wrong. She had dismissed them as a couple, but neglected to consider how pure most love was. What are you, fucking Bella and Bella with Edward? This might ignore her partner and target John. Or they could be one of those sexually adventurous couples she'd read about, prowling for other couples. Lizzie had not given a single real thought to the subject until that moment, when bloody hatred clawed itself out of her soul. Just as she was about to let those emotions leak out onto her face, Lizzie heard the melody again over the beating of her heart. Sad, but calm. She wasn't sure what John would say to her, but the thought of him soothed the growing rage. It was also possible that the girl hadn't wanted to seem too forward, like they had been tracking them. Yeah, that's pretty much what I'm sure most people would think. Most normal people. Checking their faces more carefully, Lizzie saw hints of nervousness and forced casualness. She set aside her main concern, flagging it as a potential problem for future consideration. Only a tiny fraction of a second had passed. Lizzie gave them both an apologetic smile. Quick thinker. That's very kind of you, but it's hard for us to have much of a social life. We're trying to get our degrees quickly. Oh, that's a shame. The offer is still open, though. Let your husband know, okay? Okay. With that, Lizzie brushed them as quickly as she could without seeming rude. Despite the potential threat and new source of danger to consider, she also felt a little warm. People thought they were married. They were often together on campus, but Lizzie had thought she'd restrained the majority of her affection for when they were alone. The warmth drained away slowly as Lizzie went about her business, though. They still weren't married. John was willing to tie the knot, but the thought of it made her heart leap into her chest. It had nothing to do with the idea of being with him. Lizzie berated herself for the very thought, and everything to do with how she was sure that the wedding would draw bad luck to them somehow. You could just, do it in private or something, just get a judge or lawyer or what the fuck ever and just, have them as your witness, pronounce you man and wife, and boom, there you go, done. At first, she hadn't wanted to get married because she was afraid that the official record would draw Koitek down on them somehow. That's a more reasonable fear. But over 2 years had passed since the violent incident, and it was clear that they had escaped. Enrolling in college hadn't drawn any negative attention either, so it was safe for them to get married. We don't know that for sure yet, because, hey, some people like to serve revenge cold, And yet, something would go wrong. Even if they didn't invite anyone, she was sure that someone would ruin their day. And while no one could possibly ruin their relationship, she would only have one wedding day, and she wanted it to be perfect. Suddenly, the people around her were too many. Hey, I know this particular song. More, damn it, what's the term called? I can't believe I freaking forgot. Royalty-free music. Faceless, soulless creatures, moving past her indifferently. The drone of their voices drowned out the melody. Stopping in place, Lizzie frowned, struggling to regain it. But his melody had drifted out of her mind, and no amount of thinking about the joy she felt with him would bring it back. Checking the time, Lizzie decided that she had enough before she needed to get to class. Normally she preferred to arrive early, but that was no longer her priority. What's going on? I hope it's nothing like my mic unplugging or something, and then it's just going to end up making the audio from the rest of this point onward mute, because that would be fucking annoying. But I'm going to assume, just for the sake of my sanity, that it is nothing of importance. Anyway, the gentle buzz of class, which she usually found passable, if a pale second to being with him, would now only disrupt her. It was difficult to hold herself back, but Lizzie managed to sprint across campus no faster than an ordinary runner. This wasn't the first time, and someone from the track team had actually tried to recruit her. That was unacceptable. The track uniforms were flattering, but everyone would be wearing them. Of course, he would come out to events to be supportive, but that meant his eyes would be assaulted by the entire female track team. That could not be allowed. I don't think they're... You're worrying too much, you crazy psycho. Why is my mouse... Okay, it must be from the game. Kill the track team just to be safe. Let it go. Yeah, seriously. Come on, just don't. Let it go. Let it go, Lizzie. John would want you to let it go. Here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna use my arrow keys on my keyboard and just... There we go. Lizzie gripped her forehead with both hands, forcing the thought away. She didn't need to do that anymore. The hollowness within her grew and grew as she left campus. Fortunately, their little apartment was nearby. A split home provided as housing for couples. So it's basically a dormitory. It had taken serious work to obtain one despite not being married, as the fools in admissions thought there was a chance she and John might break up. Since it was 2:52, John was likely to be reading for a class. He had referenced a paper being due soon, but he never went down to the computer lab until she was in class. After all, he knew that she might need him. His consideration made a warm glow spread through Lizzie, but that wasn't enough. She needed to see him. She had her key in hand as she approached the door, but it was already unlocked, almost as if he had known. Lizzie threw it open and rushed inside. John sat on the couch, reading a textbook. "Hello, John. It's good to see you, I guess." He looked perfect. And when he glanced up at the noise and saw her there, gasping for breath with her eyes wild, he just gave a comforting smile. "Everything all right, Lizzie?" "Of course it is. I just forgot a book I needed for class." She swept up to him and wrapped her arms around his shoulders to give him a slow kiss. The sight of him had calmed her considerably, and Lizzie tried to keep the desperation out of the kiss. Yes, this warm intimacy with him was what she needed. There was no sense giving him anything to worry about. She had found him, her perfect person. Lizzie drew back slightly and rested her forehead against his. Her heart filled with warmth, and his melody strong in her mind once again. "I love you, Lizzie." It made her heart flutter just as much as the first time he said it. "I love you too, John. More than anything." But as happy as she was to reply, she sensed that something wasn't quite right. The dull eyes of unhappiness. There was a bit of tension in his eyes. Was he carrying some weight? Depression? Had someone done something to him? I don't know. Maybe, he's kind of grown to accept your own branch of madness along with his own at the end of the last game, so maybe he's just upset that he didn't win the local lottery or something. Are there any scratch tickets nearby? No. Lizzie realized that wasn't it. He was looking at her with concern, having sensed some part of her neediness. It was wonderful that he was so attentive, but the idea that she could have caused him any pain broke her heart. Is there anything you want to talk about? Encourage him, bring up something else, ask indirectly. Let's go with... Yeah, let's just explain fully. Well, there was this couple. She explained the encounter, hesitating a moment to give him her full thoughts, but eventually sharing. As expected, he wasn't disturbed by her fears. It didn't tell her that she was wrong. Even though you kind of are. John had been through too much with her after all. I know, and it's made him a worse person because of it. You think it was nothing unusual? Judging from what you said, they just sound lonely to me. They probably just want to find people they have someone in common with. Maybe. But even if that's true, I still don't want them anywhere near us. They're probably stupid, evil people, John. All we need is the two of us. Yeah, that would be a bad combination, wouldn't it, Lizzie? There's stupid people, and then there's evil people, and then there's the worst kind of people. Stupid evil people. All we need is the two of us. He smiled ruefully, but there was real affection in his expression, too. John pulled her into a quick embrace and squeezed her tight. If that's how you feel, we don't need to interact with other people. I kind of want to just keep my head down and graduate anyway. I agree. She cuddled with him for a moment longer, nestling her head against his chest, then reluctantly pulled back, watching her hair as it clung to him. Though she longed to stay, she knew that it was better to go to class. Maximizing time in the short term would only hinder their long-term objectives, and she wanted as much of him as she could possibly get. Lizzie headed to their bedroom and traded one spiral notebook for another, feeling a moment of guilt at the deception. But no, it was better this way. She could take the burden onto herself and leave his life lighter. And here I thought you've learned to trust this stupid fool. She left with a kiss and a cheery wave, but then crept around the side of the apartment. She had left a little earlier than necessary to arrive to class on time for this very purpose. From the perfect angle, she could see him through the window, going back to his book, studying so seriously to help them have a better life together. Lizzie didn't try to hide the broad smile on her face, just spent a while watching him. There was less need to watch him now that they were together, but she still enjoyed it. Once she had been observed, and the other girl had made the despicable assumption that Lizzie was concerned that he would cheat on her. As if such a thing was possible. Wasn't that just what you were thinking? Actually, no, you were just thinking someone come on to him. Never mind. Never mind. As if she needed any reason except to look at him. She did like to observe him sometimes to make sure he wasn't sad again. John's depression was mostly under control now that they had abandoned the awful Koitek medicine. But she knew that part of him that needed to be watched. That was part of him that needed to be watched. The thought of his inner sadness made Lizzie want to run back inside and kiss him again. Forget class, and just spend the time making love until he looked only happy and relaxed. Yeah, well, unfortunately for you, I've disabled adult content, so it would be very quick and uneventful. Literally. But honestly, maybe I'm doing him a favor by making it impossible for him to stick dick and crazy. Reluctantly, Lizzie pulled herself away and headed toward the lecture hall. John was mentally healthy. No, he is not! We've already established that pretty much with the entirety of the last game. Especially the ending. He wouldn't forget about her love just because she was away for a little while. She made sure of that. What a nice little lecture hall. I like the wooden ceiling light things. It's nice to look at. She arrived just a little late, but it was a relaxed university, and no one cared too much. Lizzie carefully set out her books and focused on the lesson. There were worse things than classes, If the universe declared that she couldn't spend every single moment with him, she needed something else to fill her time. With a few exceptions like psychology, classes weren't obnoxious at all. A few even provided knowledge that might have utility in the future. And all of it had some utility in getting them closer to their degrees. Once, it had been difficult for Lizzie to think about such long-term plans. But now she could see how both of them in earning degrees would help them create the life they wanted. But after that, things became more tangled in her mind. She wanted to be with him. She wanted whatever he wanted. But he was convinced that they should take jobs in the industry, play some small role in preventing pharmaceutical giants like Koitek from doing anything as terrible as they'd done at their old high school. Probably would be for the best, honestly. That, you two devote yourselves to that sort of cause. Or the experiment that they had done that led to Lizzie's existence. Even better. I'd be totally all for with preventing more Lizzies running around. The idea that John wanted to make sure there would never be anyone else like her, that she would be the only one, is so romantic, right? It made her tingle all over. Yep. I read you like a damn dictionary. She didn't think he would approve of that thought, but she liked it so much that she kept it to herself. Better for him that it makes you tingle rather than homicidal. But the idea of getting involved with Koitek again, even directly, still left her in a foul mood. She wanted what he wanted, of course. A life together. They would have that, no matter what they chose. It would be fine. For once, Lizzie set such sights aside and focused fully on class. After the lecture finished, Lizzie practically skipped out of the hall. It had been her last class of the day, and John had likely finished the work that he needed to do in the computer lab. That left them the rest of the day to themselves. So he wouldn't have to leave him again. Let me reread that. I'm tripping over my words again. So she wouldn't have to leave him again. Lizzie stopped by the store first, since they were low on food. It hurt her pride as a cook that they had to eat ramen, but money was tight. The least she could do was purchase cheap vegetables and enhance the experience. Well, if you know where to shop, you can get some decent food for real cheap. As she picked out appropriate ones, Lizzie carefully kept track of her spending versus the amount of money she had left. She had aged out of child support. Not that the man who impregnated her mother had ever been reliable, which combined with college expenses left her in a more difficult financial situation than ever before in her life. She was careful to add everything up in her head so that she still had enough money to drop by the pharmacy after getting their groceries. It was a small locally owned one where she felt comfortable getting John's depression medication, though it seemed to be getting more expensive these days. Of course, she did still own Abby's home in their hometown, but Lizzie wanted to avoid anything to do with it in case Koitek was watching, and John would never want to live there anyway. Perhaps after they graduated, she could sell the house for a down payment on one of their own. That idea gave her a pleasant hum of emotions as she finished her errands and headed back home, still with a spring in her step. But when Lizzie arrived, she found the door locked. She quickly pulled out her key, adding another scratch mark to the lock before successfully opening it. I wonder how many scratch marks must be on that thing by now. The apartment was empty, really making her heart hammer in her chest. There was a note on the table, and she seized it. Eyes flickering over the words, John had gone to the computer lab and said he hoped to be back before she was, but that it might be longer. so she had an explanation. But even as Lizzie breathed a sigh of relief, part of her mind began to churn with other thoughts. What if this was some kind of excuse? No. John would never do such a thing. Never. Lizzie crumpled the paper in her hands, then nervously tried to smooth it out again. John would never betray her. She knew that now. Carried that fact tightly in her heart. But the world was filled with awful people. Terrible women who might try to seduce him. And even if he pushed them away, the idea of one laying a hand on him. And what if Koitek got hold of him somehow? They'd already tried it once, to use him to get to her. She thought they were safe now, but what if she was wrong? Once Lizzie might have flown out the door and hunted him down until she could be sure that he was safe. Now she found herself pacing, fingers tangling in her hair as she tried to quiet the thoughts screaming in her head. At least you're making some effort to try to be rational about things now, thank God. And hey, I see the little photo from earlier. Are you smiling are you smiling ever so widely as you were in the tile screen on this one, I wonder? Because if that's the case, I can't imagine what the photographer must have been thinking, seeing that lovely visage on your face. I'll shut up now and move on. On a whim, Lizzie grabbed the extra spiral notebook she'd taken and slapped it down on the table. She began furiously writing everything in her head, letting the thoughts out to give herself a little relief. She'd done this once before she had met him. Just like she collected pictures of him. Now that she had the real thing, she neglected such habits, but they helped her once. Perhaps they could again. Finally, she was done. Lizzie took a deep breath and looked over the page of furious scribbling. Some of the thoughts there embarrassed her. She needed to trust him utterly, but it was good to get them out of her head and onto paper. She felt calm again, and the memory wafted from the deep recesses of her soul. The place where she kept him, comforting her even now. Though the page was a mess, she returned from the edge. Lizzie realized that she was gripping a knife in her other hand. After a pause, she set it down. Yeah, please don't go stabbing people. Although I suppose that's going to be inevitable. Though her mind was clear, she still wasn't sure what to do. Obviously, John would never cheat on her. He had been very considerate to leave a note, and no doubt that explained the situation. It was also unlikely that anything terrible had happened to him. She still missed him, though, and wanted to drown the rest of her fears in his presence. It was possible that he would be happy if his work had gone on too long, and might be happy to see her. Unhappy. Did I say unhappy? I hope I said unhappy. Lizzie closed the notebook and put it with her others, considering what she should do. Start making dinner, wait for him to go, meet John at the computer lab. Just make dinner. You know, she is right, and that couple we saw earlier would be indeed dangerous to them and John. Maybe doing this is just basically putting Lizzie in a position where she can't protect him from the other psycho couple on the college campus. In which case, well, shit. I'm sorry, I guess, but well, I'm trying to save lives here by making sure that Lizzie here doesn't go all yandere on some poor unfortunate people's asses, you know? Especially ones who don't deserve it. It made her anxious not to take action, but Lizzie kept herself from leaving. Instead, she set about making dinner, trying not to watch the door or listen too closely for his arrival. Lizzie set about cutting up the vegetables, removing the bad portions and reducing the rest to appetizing chunks. Her knife flickered satisfyingly, perfectly balanced for her hand. They might need to do so in many ways, but she had excellent kitchen knives to work with. Even when money was tight, he had never suggested selling her knife collection. So she would have gladly sold every knife and every single thing she owned for his sake. Knife still flying, Lizzie frowned to herself. No, that wasn't right. She'd need her axe and a few knives to defend him properly. Plus, John wouldn't want her to give up everything like that. Considering such warm thoughts, Lizzie flipped her knife around in her hand a few unnecessary times as she finished cutting. Not the kind of thing she could do in public, but at home there was no one to see her but John, and he wouldn't be afraid of her. It might be too early to cook anything, so Lizzie set the chopped vegetables aside and converted the rest into a salad. She smiled to herself, but realized that she was out of preparations. Her gaze wandered toward the door. Fortunately, at that very moment, she heard his footsteps outside. Lizzie was torn between rushing to greet him and waiting by her work, which made her hesitate long enough for him to enter. Sorry, I got held back. It's no problem at all. I've gotten things ready for dinner. Looks like you've been busy. I'm really hungry, so is eating early fine? Of course. Since she'd done her preparations already, Lizzie just set the water on to boil and added a few other flourishes. John set the table and she beamed at him, happy to be working together. Eventually, they both sat down together on opposite sides of their small table. It was nothing much, but it was theirs, and that was wonderful. She would have been happy just to watch him eat, but she knew that he loved to talk to her even more. The idea that he wanted her to open herself up to him, even her darkest thoughts, always made her happy. But for today, she had nothing particularly dark on her mind. So you implied that you got held up in the lab? Mostly it was nothing unusual. Just had to answer some questions. But Dan caught me at the end, wanted me to switch shifts at the library. He wanted me to do tonight, which I said wouldn't work, so we had to do some weird rescheduling. Hasn't that been happening a lot lately? Yeah, and I might be picking up even more shifts. Figure it can't hurt, right? No, but she didn't like him to be away from home more often. Lizzie had to admit that the library job was a good one, allowing her to study or read most of the time, but she still didn't like it. At least she could visit him without it being a hindrance. Why did he feel the need to work so much, though? Lizzie had her own campus job, and the numbers of their debt weren't too awful thanks to scholarships. Would it be better if they could get rid of it? Maybe she should consider going back to the house and selling it after all? Though she considered asking him all those questions, Lizzie decided to hold back. John had many concerns of his own, and adding her anxiety to those might make him depressed again. She was stronger, so it was better for her to shoulder the burden. This lack of communication is going to cause you problems, just saying. After dinner, they moved to the couch to work. It was a ratty old thing they'd gotten off a curb, but it was fairly soft and it served to hold them. They sat on opposite sides, each with their textbooks, their feet touching in between. Just being able to be so near him, so comfortably. Lizzie slid her feet against his leg and gave him a bright smile when he looked up at her. An old part of her wanted to act immediately, to have sex before the moment could pass. But they had been together for 2 years, and moments like this were hardly a rare thing. Slowly, her mind had learned that she didn't need to be desperate. The life she wanted with him was filled with moments like this too. Despite her thoughts circling around him, Lizzie finished her work rather quickly. Because of it, in a sense, there was a purpose to so many activities that had once been going through the motions. Lizzie saw he was still busy working and spent a little while admiring him. She loved that look of concentration as he became fully absorbed with something. It was even better when it was directly toward her, but just his concentration was cute too. She could have watched forever, but once she got her fill, Lizzie stood up. She kissed him on the cheek, then headed to the other side of their apartment. They didn't have a lot of space, but there was enough for her to retrieve her axe from the cupboard and experiment with it a little. She hadn't experienced any more physical instability since the incident, leaving her very capable of protecting him, but she needed to be cautious. Though she didn't like to think about it, Lizzie had to admit there was a small chance she could hurt John by accident. Even if they never had a serious conflict with Koitek again, she needed her knives to feel secure. The idea that she might cause a slight injury by accident. Lizzie practiced carefully, while following through with all the force she could muster and bringing the axe to a halt at a moment's notice. The practice was soothing, and Lizzie soon found herself smiling. There had been a time in her life, after she found him, when it had been possible that she might harm him, in order to preserve their love, though those thoughts now struck her as alien and horrible. Character development. Good for you, I guess. She would never hurt him. Never. But that meant she needed to always be prepared. When Lizzie finished, she discovered that John was watching her. She had no doubt that her expression was far from inviting, as she had been imagining cutting down threats to them, but he was watching her fondly. Lizzie beamed at him and returned her axe to its place. Are you done studying? For tonight, yeah. There's no point doing more, since I can read at work tomorrow. Then, she drifted closer to him, smile broadening as she pored over his face. He made a point of saying his work was done. Sorry, he wasn't too tired, I skipped a line. He made a point of saying his work was done, and though he had been watching her with gentle affection, she knew there was more there. Yep, his face is getting a bit red. Lizzie eagerly slid down into his lap, her body pressing up against his. Soon she could feel the proof of his desire in his pants, and she cooed happily. But though he put his arms around her waist, his eyes still watched her carefully. I know you need to get up early tomorrow. Though, do you want to? Oh, why the fuck not? Oh, the mouse was moving a bit. Grinning, Lizzie leaned in closer and kissed him. There had been so many small kisses throughout the day, each adding a little warmth inside her, and now she returned it all, kissing him deeply and passionately. His hands tightened on her waist, holding her a little closer. Most of the hesitance and uncertainty were gone now, since they were familiar with each other's bodies. She had never had trouble, needing him too much to be hesitant, but John moved more slowly. It sent a thrill through her every time he touched her confidently. Lizzie bent closer to him, and there was a loud knock on the door. Oh dear, she's seen red. Her eyes narrowed to slits, and she glared murder towards the entrance. You don't have to answer. Another knock, louder. No, ignoring it wasn't an option. Lizzie sprang up from his lap and wrenched open the door. Hey, it's you again. And you got glasses. The boy on the other side was someone she recognized from one of John's classes. John said he was intelligent, and Lizzie didn't find him annoying. Okay, so you're a different guy. And Lizzie didn't find him annoying, so under normal circumstances, he was fine. At the moment, she only felt rage toward him, barely contained within her smile. He was physically fit, but no threat. Her axe could be in her hand before... Hey, Aaron. What's up? You guys want to check the news? Francesca Kesley is gonna... Seriously, just do it. It took Lizzie an anxious moment to identify the name. A public figure, not someone they knew, related to the pharmaceutical industry. Not an immediate threat, but an annoyance at this moment. The news seemed to matter to John, so he had to turn on the salvage TV in the corner. Lizzie reluctantly acknowledged that Aaron was going to be an entity in their life, at least for a little while, and allowed him to step inside. After flipping to the right channel, John watched carefully as the news report ran. Aaron slouched against a nearby wall, leaving Lizzie to hover behind John. When she heard Koitek's name, she began to pay full attention, soaking up the information. The study they're talking about. What did we miss? They didn't go into detail, but something about how sloppy pharmaceutical experiments used to be. A whole town of people got sick. Bad stuff. Lizzie's heart began beating rapidly. Was it possible that the report mentioned her? No, not her specifically. There were privacy concerns, but it might have referenced her experiment. Lizzie's fingers began twitching at her sides, which drew John's attention. He frowned a little, then returned to Aaron. How many cases did they talk about? Anything involving specific individuals? Just information, general information I heard. Why? Exactly the question that Lizzie had been afraid of, but John didn't seem disturbed. I used to be part of a Paxatine trial that didn't go well, at least for me. I was wondering if it got mentioned. Oh, is that how you got glued into all this? Behind him, Lizzie let her fingers slowly relax. John had been thinking of her, and exposed her to any unnecessary attention. Of course he would. She was awful for doubting him. While she was feeling a warm glow, she missed John's response. Well, anyway, they only emphasized the biggest cases. Kesley is trying to prove that the harms are large enough that government policy needs to change. So that's how it was connected. Francesca Kesley was a researcher who used to work for the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Administrations. So the FDA, then, but left as part of a protest. She had been campaigning for increased powers to regulate pharmaceutical megacorporations since then. Lizzie usually didn't have many opinions about politics, but she approved in this case if it did damage to Koitek. She had never seen the woman herself, though. Lizzie watched curiously until the news station played a clip of Francesca speaking about the report, then began chewing on one knuckle. Though Francesca appeared serious and dressed professionally, she was too young for Lizzie's taste. Maybe it was fine for John to pay attention to her, since she was doing important work related to both of them, but his attention focusing on anyone else made Lizzie anxious. This is good to know, but why'd you run over here? The congressional debates are going to take forever. Oh, that wasn't the urgent part. They said it earlier. Kesley is going on a speaking tour trying to raise awareness of the issue. But not all the locations are set. We need to get her on campus, man. I get it. I don't know how much help we can be, though. Well, and I wanted to ask if you'd join again. We need more people to lead this if we're going to gain any momentum. John hesitated, looking toward her. His mouth had opened slightly as if to ask something, but he saw the tension in her eyes. Aaron looked back too, but Lizzie had pulled her finger from her mouth, and he couldn't see past her smile. It's going to be hard for us to commit to that, I think. But keep us informed about what happens, alright? Alright, I won't press. I'm gonna get Kesley here, though. Surely we're a big enough campus. While John made small talk and walked Aaron out, Lizzie stayed in front of the television and kept watching the broadcast. Koitek had tried to take John away from her. She had feared 1,000 things, and many times he had calmed her fears. But back then, she had been absolutely right. The intellectual part of her knew that it was a huge corporation, manufacturing many common drugs. Not all of them were as ill-advised as Paxitine. Not every experiment was harmful, and not every employee could be as terrible as Mrs. Smith. It didn't matter. Lizzie hated all of them. But she couldn't hack apart the entire corporation, so she had no choice but to hope that something could be done. That was why she didn't mind people like Aaron so much. They could be useful. Maybe even this Francesca, but that didn't mean Lizzie wanted her to come here. Especially since she might bring attention from Koitek. Was this what she had been fearing? That was why they couldn't get married, not with an event like this looming in the future. Not while something could go wrong. All too soon, the broadcast moved on to other subjects. Though the pharmaceutical giants were becoming increasingly important to everyday life, they were still unusually ignored compared to the banal celebrity news. Lizzie didn't care about that, since random foolish celebrities wouldn't attract John's eye. She still moved to turn the television off, though. When she turned back, she discovered John watching her with concern. She had been aware that Aaron had left, of course, but that was at the periphery of her thoughts. Only now did she reflect on the amount of time that had passed. Are you worried about it? I'm just afraid something will happen. Koitek will be watching. John approached and wrapped his arms around her. Lizzie eagerly let herself rest against his chest. Maybe, but everyone will be watching. Francesca Kesley is one of their main political opponents, so they have to know that everything around her will be scrutinized. Even if Aaron gets her to come, I'm sure it will pass without incident. That was logical. It was probably true. And although Lizzie cut and recut his sentence a dozen different ways, she couldn't discern any real affection when he spoke of the other woman's name. She was just a political figure working on an important cause. No more. She wasn't the threat. I know. But the reminder has me feeling so stressed. I understand. Let's just get some sleep, okay? Too late, Lizzie realized that she had worked against herself. Though she felt anxious and twitchy now, if he had initiated it again, she would have happily welcomed it. That would have let her take her mind off everything else for a time. But now he would just worry that she was only doing it for his sake. As much as she tried to convince him otherwise, it might be trouble for him, and that always made things less enjoyable. Accepting the way things had gone, Lizzie smiled warmly at him and pulled them both toward the bedroom. Please hold me until I fall asleep. As they lay together, Lizzie curled up against his side. She began to feel calm again. Being near him always generated a deep warmth within her, and just him lying in his arms like this was peaceful bliss. Maybe John had been right not to do anything that night. Her love for him was depthless, but she wasn't as perfect as he deserved. You could say that again. Sometimes her mind wouldn't cooperate, or her past got in the way. What she needed most now was to lie here with him, together. For her, it was just another glorious element of their life together. And as John stroked her hair affectionately, she reminded herself that he was happy just to be like this as well. Smiling, Lizzie drifted to sleep. The warehouse stretched forever in every direction, sterile white walls yawning toward eternity. Dreaming about your slaughter at the Koitek facility, I assume? In the center of it, they were impossibly tiny, yet they were everything. Her memory of the scene played out again. Mrs. Smith having both of them trapped, trying to turn them against each other. In real life, she had fought back. John had helped her, and trusted her even at her worst, and they had escaped. But this time, instead of using an injection to cause him pain, Mrs. Smith began removing her clothes. She cast Lizzie a mocking smile and slid into John's lap, pressing herself against his chest. He struggled, but he was bound too tightly to do anything as Lizzie tore out of the dream and found herself bolt upright in bed. She had snagged her knife from its place and held it in front of her, gleaming in the moonlight. It took her a moment to come back to herself, to realize that it had been a dream. John was lying beside her, coming awake as he realized how upset she was. There was no fear in his eyes, but she could see a deep concern there. Lizzie, are you all right? I'm fine, John. Just a bad dream. She gave him a beaming smile and set the knife aside casually, but her acting wasn't good enough. There were still those lines of concern on his face. It was wonderful they had come to know her better and better, but that meant she couldn't keep herself from being a burden to him. It could be hard to shake those off. Come here and rest, Lizzie. Though she wanted to pretend that everything was all right, she couldn't resist his soothing voice. Lizzie curled up next to him again, resting her head on his chest. It did feel wonderful, pushing aside the remnants of the dream, but this wasn't how it was supposed to be. She was supposed to protect him. John was the one who was so sad, who needed to be protected from the world. He carried so much weight. She couldn't add anything to it. Lizzie bit her lip and squeezed him tighter, wishing she could be perfect. I'm sorry, John. Don't say that. I'm glad that I can be here for you. You always are. Come here and try to relax. She snuggled against him, much of her anxiety fading. But what if one day he wasn't there? What if someone took him from her? She would bathe the world in blood, and it would do no good because he would be gone, and she would have nothing. Lizzie slowly managed to let go of other thoughts and just enjoy his presence. But it took her a very long time to go to sleep. The lecture rolled onward, flowing around the edges of Lizzie's mind. She was absorbing some of the information, but her thoughts were mostly elsewhere. On the page in front of her, increasingly, she'd taken a back corner seat so that it would look like she was dutifully taking notes. but in fact she was pouring out her thoughts onto the pages of her spiral notebook. Lizzie paused a moment, looking over what she had written recently. It was chaotic, but a familiar chaos. She'd written his name many times, frequently surrounded by hearts. In several places, she'd drawn little pictures of herself killing Mrs. Smith. It was playful, though, and writing out her emotions made her feel a little more stable. You better hope no one's peeking over your shoulder and looking at your notes. Just saying. Thinking of him always made her smile, but Lizzie also stopped to consider John as analytically as she could. Her mind ran over the roll of images she held of his face, all the smallest changes in his eyes. He was doing better than usual, she realized. Though his smile was sometimes melancholy, it felt appropriate for him, and she didn't see any other signs of depression. There were no shadows in his eyes. He had been very affectionate last night. That thought made Lizzie squirm a little in her seat. She let herself dwell on that shared moment for a long time. Pulling herself out of her thoughts, Lizzie set aside the notebook and returned to her real notes. She didn't need to take many, quickly jotting down the key points to catch up to the speaker. Once she was done, her mind began to wander again. It seemed that the event planning had gone through. Their local campus activist groups had petitioned the right places, so now Francesca Kesley was going to be speaking in town. That was a good thing, theoretically. It would disturb Koitek and would make John happy. Lizzie had read some of her articles to try to vet her, and Francesca seemed intelligent. Her visit would probably give them nice things to talk about. She was married, too, and had been for 6 years. Everything was fine, so Lizzie didn't object to them getting a little involved and helping set up the event. Everything was fine. Lizzie absent-mindedly realized that she was gripping her pen tightly, stabbing it repeatedly into the side of her notebook, leaving it covered in gouges. After class, Lizzie headed out and started to walk her usual path before she remembered that things had changed. Frowning slightly, she changed her route and headed to the administration building instead, where she would be meeting with John. Others would be there as well. The exact purpose of the event was unclear to her. At a minimum, they would gather and receive information about the various activities they would be doing in preparation for the visit and speech. Presumably after they would go do said activities, and she could be alone with him. Except that he had expressed interest, which was reasonable. Perhaps they would participate. He had noticed her anxiousness, however, and not committed to anything beforehand. That was very considerate of him, but made Lizzie vow to do a better job of supporting him. As she entered the building, she saw that a crowd of people had gathered. It appeared to be an ordinary enough college group, likely not a concern, though it was more difficult to evaluate threats in crowds such as this. She searched through the random people in the way, but was unable to find John. Realizing that she was going to be engaged, Lizzie refocused on Aaron, who was coming to greet her. Aaron and 2 women. I didn't know you had a twin. Young, attractive women their age, wearing clothes that were stylish and extremely suggestive. Not physical threats, but potentially. Lizzie gave all of them a brittle smile. Hey, Lizzie. Good to see you here. Hello. We're just getting organized, but there were a ton of things we need to do. We already printed a bunch of flyers to put up, but we actually got space on one of the big boards, so we need some people to help design a poster. And we also... Where's John? Over in the corner. We're going to organize after... Thank you! Lizzie left them, though she watched Aaron and the others for a moment longer. Aaron seemed to have noticed that she wasn't completely happy, which was a problem. Being herself around John had made her sloppy, though Aaron might also be more perceptive than average. She headed through the crowds, searching for John. Part of her knew that the people here were probably decent, given their interest. No, too many of them were just looking for socialization, or a cause that made them feel good about themselves. There were too many of them to judge, and some could possibly be threats. Investigate everyone in the room, ignore others, and find John. Defend John from what? Ask Aaron for more information, and retreat and monitor the situation. Let's ask for more information. Lizzie's mind raced, considering her best course of action. And then she heard John's voice. In a rush, she realized how close she had come to making a mistake, one that might have hurt him. She wasn't stable, and thinking about that fact didn't help. Lizzie hurried to track him down and draw on his presence. There he was. Lizzie restrained herself as she simply skipped up to him, taking his arm like any normal girlfriend would do. Her fingers dug into his arms, harder than she intended, as he gave her a look of a hint of concern. Hello, Lizzie. Sorry I'm late. She beamed at John to reassure him that everything was all right, and then also beamed at the nearby people. Not likely any threats, but she beamed hard at them anyway. I actually just finished organizing all the different tasks. Aaron is better at drawing people together than organizing the details, you know? That's so true. Some girl laughed unnecessarily loud at his observation, prompting Lizzie's full attention to zero in on her. Slight pupil dilation, no visible flushing, heart rate slightly above average. Was that flirting? Was she trying to steal him away from her? But we haven't assigned any tasks yet. What do you think, Lizzie? Do you want to help? Or do we have too much to do at home? It was an obvious lifeline to her if she was too stressed, and Lizzie loved him for it. Of course she could trust her, John. He would always be true to her. You might have to go. We need all the help we can get. The girl's gaze turned away from John, too deliberately. A ruse? Toward Lizzie. She gave a smile that touched the corners of her eyes, indicating that it was authentic. But though Lizzie automatically mirrored it, she felt only a cold hollowness. I was actually hoping you could help us put up the flyers. I've seen you around campus. You're super fast. What game did she have in mind with such flattery? Lizzie failed to see the advantage the girl gained, but she disliked the situation all the same. Still, there was a wide variety of different tasks available, and not all of them would leave John vulnerable. She had delayed too long in answering, leaving an uncomfortable pause. It had been a very long time since her social skills had failed her like that. Worse, it was causing him stress, which was unacceptable. Lizzie pretended to be looking over the organizational sheet to buy herself a little time. It's up to you, Lizzie, but I noticed that we need a couple people to move cabinets and desks out the supply room we're going to use. Think we could do that? Lizzie smiled as she realized that he was offering her a chance. Though John was always considerate, when he was feeling less depressed, He was especially attentive to her concerns. The idea of participating wasn't unpleasant, but it would be so much calmer and more wonderful alone at home. Lizzie looked up, smiled, and made her decision. Don't participate, let him participate, but keep him safe, take care of it for him, participate together, take John's idea. Let's Let's participate together. Putting up the flyers sounds like fun. Let's go together. Good. We have a plan for getting them through campus, but also all over town. John began going over the plan, which was simple enough. She could probably have done all the flyers herself, but if she got to work around with him, then it would be worth it. The problem was that so many people were involved. People John delegated to other locations. Suspicious girls with questions. At one point, they even needed to drive in someone's car. It was too many people too close to her for her. She had hoped it would just be the two of them. But as they worked, John was often smiling. The whole social environment, working together people toward the same cause, seemed to make him happy. That was good. And he saved his bright smiles for her, never getting too close to any of the other girls. It was fine. The event left Lizzie a little nervous, but she judged that acceptable. If she could drain stress from him into herself, that was the way it should be. I don't know, I think you getting more stress would be of great disadvantage to everybody's health and well-being. When they got home, John seemed lighter than usual. She found herself smiling in response to his happiness, and snuggled against him as they fell asleep after the long day, his hand stroking her hair. Okay, I think I'm just going to go ahead and cut the episode off here. We can do our little grassroots activism some more in the next episode, while trying to also make sure that Lizzie doesn't go stabbing McMurderpants on some poor unfortunate souls. I hope you guys enjoyed this first episode of Crimson Gray, Dusk and Dawn. If you did and you want to see more content from me, feel free to subscribe to my channel. I will see you all next time. Take care.